I'm Dean Newlund, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. Well, those of you who have not listened in for the last few weeks, we've changed our name. Welcome to our renamed podcast. It's called Leadovation. And you may ask why? Well, let me tell you. While intuition, which was the focus of our last podcast, the business of intuition, will continue to be a key superpower that we want to discuss and highlight, we also decided to include 3 elements our listeners have been asking for. They really wanted some inspirational, practical advice on, number 1, leadership, i.e. being a leader of one's own life, a leader of others, teams and organizations and companies. Number 2, they were asking for innovative ideas, because if we aren't learning faster than our competition, well, quite frankly, we're going to fall behind. And number 3, what I call intentional, healthy presence. In a world where the speed of change is the slowest it will be for the rest of our lives, sorry, but it's probably true, and our nervous systems are not designed to absorb and react to this speed of change, well, we really need to intentionally find ways to be healthy and present so that the journey to our success is as important as the destination. Now, my next guest is a woman named Kristen Brun Sharkey. She is going to talk to us about some wonderful ideas regarding improvisation. And sometimes that improvisation actually encourages intuition, but she's got some wonderful exercises to share. Those of you who know me well, I started this journey to this company, Mission Facilitators International, back when I was actually an actor. And I got to go through a 3-year professional actors training program at the University of Washington. At the time, it was, I think, the top 3rd school in the country, and I was quite fortunate to get in after a few attempts. And I just learned a ton about myself, about executive presence, about being in the present, about being able to understand motivation and why people do what they do and the different characters that we all play, et cetera, et cetera. And I never realized that it would lead me to a company that does facilitations, team building, and strategic planning. Part of what I did back in those days was what we're going to hear more about, which was improvisation, which I felt once I got sort of past that sort of, fear of doing that, wonderfully creative, freeing experience that really taught me a lot about myself, creativity, being innovative, being intuitive, knowing myself, others, and so forth. So let me tell you about this wonderful guest. Her name is Kristen Brun Sharkey, and she's an executive coach and facilitator who has spent 15 years leading teams in different kinds of technology companies and marketing companies and major players in, like, say, Yahoo, Verizon, and Hearst. She holds a master's degree in management, strategy, and leadership from Michigan State University, and she is also an ICF, which stands for International Coach Federation, credentialed coach. Through her company, Emboldify, Kristen leverages techniques and principles from improv theater to enhance leadership skills, helping leaders at all levels improve their decision-making, drive innovation, and execute effective change. Kristen Brun Sharkey on the Leadovation podcast. So, Kristen, it's great to have you on the show. When I found out about you, I went, oh, kindred spirit. And I know that you're big into improv and that you have found a way to use this tool in your practice, in your company, working with teams and organizations. I can't wait to hear more about it. My background years and years and years and years ago was as an actor and went through a lot of improv classes, had some of the most fun in my entire life being that free and that creative. And so I'm very interested in how you have been able to take improv and apply it to a corporate setting bring it into teamwork, team building. We try to do some of that. We do it occasionally. The idea of simulations and gamifications and all that sort of stuff is really, I think, a great way to be able to enhance learning for adults. If it works for kids, it can work for adults. So tell us, how do you do this? And some of your stories that kind of indicate some of the success that you've been able to get.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is a lot of fun, I will definitely say. And as far as how I implement it, it always starts with a conversation about what the goals are. So some of the common things are around increasing like leadership presence. It's actually been a very hot topic lately for my speaking and workshops, but also things like building a culture of innovation, decision-making skills, how to like build authenticity in leaders, things like that. So depending on what the topic and goals are, and how much time we have and like what the format is, then I basically build out a workshop usually that has different improv exercises built into it, just around those particular areas.
So let me ask you a quick question. I don't want you to give away secret sauce because, of course, you're the expert and the master and all this, and people should come to you for some of this. But is there any particular example? Like, for example, I've got a team and we need to get better at, like, say, decision making, or we need to get better at building trust, building community. Can you give us an example of a particular type of improv that you've run them through so that people sort of get a sense about how this looks and feels?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, one of my favorite exercises, which you've probably encountered back in your improv days because it's a classic, but is basically called a one word at a time story or one word story. Different. Sounds familiar.
It does, but explain it to people, please.
I will absolutely explain it for everybody though. So the way this works is you have a group of people, usually you go around in a circle and you tell a story and one person just gives one word at a time. So you literally, if you're going around the circle, it would be like once upon a time and so forth. And this is great for a number of reasons. You can definitely make it a little bit more complex by adding in like a story spine component to it. So, which is basically all the guidelines around like, here's the different components of how you tell a story. So that kind of adapts it more for like talking about like storytelling, but even just at its base, if you don't do anything else with it, you're just going around and you're trying to tell a story as a group. It's so good for many of the things that we do with improv. It helps people with overthinking because you don't have that much time to figure out your answer and you can't pre-plan it since you need to wait until the person immediately before you gives their word. So it kind of helps with people just going with their intuition and speaking like off the cuff. And it also helps with collaboration because in any group, as I'm sure you have seen many times, there's some people who are very hesitant to contribute, and then there's other people who could be a little bit more hesitant to contribute. They're always the ones who want to jump in immediately. And it helps with both of those because everybody has to contribute something. So there's no getting skipped. So everybody's kind of used to like they're going to have to contribute, but also the people who are used to being able to like drive the conversation and the story more kind of have to give up control because they only have one word to contribute at a time.
I remember years ago, I was working with this great guy by the name of Dave Overholt. He was the senior vice president over at Honeywell Aerospace down in Phoenix or Tempe, Arizona. And we were coming in and he wanted me to work with his team of other engineers. And he says, Dean, I just have one request. Do not make me do role plays. Because he was like, absolutely hated the idea. And I think I still pushed him into doing a few and it turned out to be successful. How do you get the resistant person to feel comfortable enough to do something that they feel is uncomfortable, which is to expose themselves to this creative process of improv?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And there's definitely a level of exercise, I would say, that people takes more trust and comfort level and people kind of opening up to. So I always just kind of share upright, particularly if it's a shorter workshop or if it's at the beginning of a longer workshop. Like, I'm not going to make you stand up in front of a group of people and just start making things up like off the cuff. Like, it's going to be within the course of a game. or an exercise, but really these are games at their core, and they're also fun. So that helps with the hesitancy because there's a lot of laughter, and that kind of just helps people let their guards down a little bit. But there's definitely an art to easing people into it as well, because there's always going to be some who are more hesitant.
If you go online right now or use ChatGPT, you could ask it, or you could ask Google, please provide me a list of improv exercises for a team of 15. It would give you any number of things. And some of them might be what you just mentioned, that one word story, or there's, dozens and dozens of other things. I'm wondering about your skill set when it comes to the overall design of a program that includes the debrief, so that it is fun, but that we can find a way to glean learning out of it that could be applied back to work when we're not improving. So could you talk about maybe an example where the improv was part of a larger program, and what was that? What did it look like, and how did you design this whole thing so that somebody got something out of it other than, oh, that was a fun time? We got some paintball money. Let's go and do some improv with this woman named Kristen. That sounds like fun. And then go out afterwards and have a beer. It's sometimes people sort of think that improv is just about having fun and that's it. There are some learnings to it. So how do you design around that whole learning process?
Yeah, and I think I missed a little bit of what you just said. It froze for a second, but I think I got the gist of it. But if I missed something, feel free to redirect me. But yeah, so definitely agreed. It's more than just being fun. And that is kind of like a way that I differentiate, because there are a lot of improv theaters who will do like a team building improv, like half day workshop or whatever. But I differentiate that because I'm basically combining the improv side with the more typical like leadership frameworks and education and expertise. Like I have a master's degree in leadership, and I am also just a giant nerd when it comes to this stuff. So that's part of it too, is combining it so that I do think like you can do any of these exercises without a debrief, and there's still going to be some value because it's helping to kind of build those neural pathways in the brain. But if you're going to get the most learning value of it, you're combining it with the more conceptual parts of it. And then you're also combining it with that debrief, as you mentioned, where people are getting a chance to really understand, how does this apply to their day to day? And like, what do they need to do to actually build up a practice of it? Because a lot of the things that we're doing in the brain when you're doing a lot of improv, like with anything, it takes practice to build those up and have them become easier, more like muscle memory. So
do you sometimes use improv in circumstances where a team has a goal of gaining skills in something versus the interpersonal relationships? Yeah, it's usually going to be within the topic of leadership development or within that general umbrella, but there's a lot that falls within that, right? So like I've worked with more like technical leaders on like, how do you build more of a culture of innovation within your team, for example? Like what are like the specific things that you can do to encourage more like the neutralization of failure, so people are more comfortable with taking risks? And how do you create like safe spaces for creative brainstorming? Because that often does not go along with the very analytical type of thinking that we do in the workplace most of the time. So if you don't mind, could you give us another example? Like you just mentioned brainstorming and planning, and certainly change management certainly kind of is connected to that. But is there an activity that you might have that you would be willing to share that has to do with brainstorming, maybe with an executive team, for example? Yeah, for brainstorming, a lot of the most like basic level is using yes and roles, which most people, if they are familiar with improv in any level of depth, they've probably heard of the concept of yes and. But if not, please tell. So it's really the cornerstone of improv. So the idea is you have two components. You have the yes and the and. So somebody puts a statement or idea forth. The idea is that you're first validating their response, the yes,
And then you're adding your own contribution onto it, which is the and part. So it's like, yes, we could do this. And then we could also add on this particular amendment so that we could do this other thing as well. So it's very different from a lot of what happens in companies and a lot of what people think is brainstorming, but it's really not, because you're separating that divergent and convergent thinking, because there's really those two different thinking styles and they do not work very well together. You really need to have a separate process for the generative part. So that's like you're coming up with ideas, you're like creating things. Like that needs to be a separate process and separate space from the more like evaluative thinking, where you're actually going through and analyzing things and figuring out like what the best solution is.
We've sometimes used that yes and principle that you just described as a guiding principle for how a team might be engaged in a meeting, in order to obviously spur innovative ideas and collaboration, but also to create a psychological safety, because the flip side of yes and is no, but you're
right.
wrong, I'm right. Yeah. That's the other side of the coin. And so who wants to participate in a meeting if you are afraid of being said that you're wrong or being, talked over or what have you? So it really is a great exercise, to your point, about not just collaboration, innovation, and brainstorming, but also about just creating the safety for people to show up.
Yep. I also always warn people of the yes, but, which I think is almost more destructive than just the flat out no, because it's a little bit like, yeah, no, like I sound like I'm going to agree with you, but actually I don't. Here's what's wrong with what you just said.
Let me ask another question here, Kristen, as we pick up here. There's another tool that I've heard about called question storming. And I think it comes out of the Stanford school. I don't know. They were doing some work on innovation, and we created a program about innovative skills for leaders, and question storming was one of them. And I think it had to do, if I remember, where you keep asking questions about something over and over again. It's almost like Honeywell, or was it GE, had the 5 whys. Why is this? Why is this? Why is this? But you find something and you continue to ask questions about it. So you cut past the symptomology of the situation and you start to drill down into the cause of it by asking question after question after question over one topic. Have you used that, and has it been useful at all?
I actually have not. I feel like I've used like exercises that are kind of similar, but they are more just to kind of get the brain thinking about things in a different way. But this actually sounds pretty cool. So I'm going to have to look more into this like particular method. But I mean, it looks like it's a pretty similar idea. It's like there's no bad questions. There's no... Right. It's like, let's just get it all out first, and then we can kind of figure out where to go from there.
Well, for you and for anybody who's listening in on this, we've got some information about question storming. We've also got information about, you've heard about blue sky thinking, which is kind of a catchphrase for thinking outside the box. But there's actually a process for that, which I'm happy to share with you or anybody else. Just, reach out. Do your programs normally, are they like a day long, half day? Do you embed them in other programs? What's the scope of what you do?
Yeah, it totally depends on the company, right? And what they're doing previously, what they're looking for. My ideal is actually a hybrid program between like workshops, individual coaching, and team coaching, like over a period of time. Because I think that's where you really get the most learning on this stuff. And you have the coaching as a way to check in on the application. And then you can kind of tailor the workshop topics to what's coming up throughout those coaching sessions. But I do everything from like a 2-hour session, which is going to be very high level, like very focused on one topic, because we can only do so many exercises in that time, all the way up to like 2 or 3 days.
Have you ever done like a large scale improv, or call it simulation, that could potentially last a whole day? I have played around with some of that. None of them has been that big, though. I'm wondering whether you have anything that's that immersive, where they really dig in and they play out these roles. for a long period of time, or is it more of these episodic, smaller events that you lead people through?
Yeah, I haven't tried anything that's quite at that scale where you're actually like in the role playing or the like in character, so to speak, for like an entire day or longer.
Yeah.
I do think it'd be interesting. There's some challenges with that, but it also could be really interesting from a learning perspective.
What we've done sometimes is we've actually had people come up with skits, where when we do a facilitation, maybe there's a brainstorming session. There's some really key outcomes that come out of that. We put people into different groups. They have a certain sort of setup of the scenario. They got to create a, sort of like, what's the situation? What's the problem? What's the solution? The sort of the age-old triad of the hero's journey. Here's the different stages of how people normally tell stories. So go off and create something. And we've had a lot of fun with that. And it seems to take the cognitive brainstorming idea that they've developed and then really internalized it by playing out the character who has to try it on and work with it and bring it into action, bring it into fruition in this make-believe scenario. And it seems to have worked out pretty well. So anyway, have you do some things like that at times?
Yeah, where it will be a day where you kind of start off at like a higher level with the concepts and then you kind of break it down to a project or like a group thing that they're working on throughout the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are fun to do. And that is a really good place for role playing, or skits, as you said, too. It can be really powerful to get people into that mindset.
I don't know who it was. There was somebody that maybe who wrote a book on it. I can't remember all these quotes that sort of take up my gray matter, but the quote basically was that every high-level leader should take an acting class. And it was sort of like, wow, that's a pretty strong statement. But the idea, I think, was, why would you want to do that? You got executive presence that shows up. You've got communication. You've got intuition and thinking on your feet, collaboration, creativity, all of those things that are a part of what it is to be a leader takes place in acting, takes place in improv. And I thought that's a pretty good suggestion. I remember one particular person that we were working with over at the Mayo Clinic a few years ago, and he was a pretty successful physician leader, but was having trouble with executive presence and just really too linear in his approach. Of course, that's what they're taught to do because healthcare is very regimented and very exacting, but this person needed to be a little bit more, quote unquote, outside the box. So I said, why don't you take an improv class? And he did, and he loved it. And people came back after, I don't know, several months later and said that he really had become a different type of leader as a result of the improv that he experienced. Much more compelling, much more present, much more influential, and able to think on his feet. And I thought that was a great idea.
I love that. Yeah, it really does. It helps with so many skill sets. I think there's also all these different aspects of emotional intelligence, starting with being present in the moment, which is not something that is necessarily trained or sought out after for leaders. It's so impactful for leaders to learn that.
Yeah, I think it's actually freeing. I mean, there's a certain amount of freedom by being involved in an improv where you don't have to, there's no win or lose, there's no failure, there's no success. It's just the expression of trying to find the next answer, the next moment, the next whatever emotion. And it's sort of I kind of think it's a vacation from your thinking. It's a vacation from yourself. Quoting Seinfeld. It's a way of getting out of your head and being in the moment. I think that's such a valuable skill these days, especially when we're being so inundated with so many choices and having to blot out so many different types of data. This is a time to play. One of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking about intuition earlier, I kind of was thinking about what are the processes that make intuition work. And I was thinking about this talk that I gave many, many years ago. But it was about presence, it was about purpose. And then the third thing, which you're talking about, Kristen, is about play. And if you can bring those three things together, you're probably tapping into this superpower called intuition pretty well. And you're going to be a better leader as a result of it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things I really picked up from improv, I actually had a teacher who called it yoga for the inner critic, or what I call like the inner judge. but it also is really cool. And it really leads toward being able to separate like what is your intuition from what is just your inner judge trying to shut things down, like that voice inside your head. And like what is actually like your true intuition, because you just don't have as much time to overanalyze and overthink things. Like you just have to like act. So it really helps you get in touch with that.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, you think about what's the juiciest memories we have in our life. It's ones that we can refer back to when we were in that present moment, that freedom, that creativity. And I think that improv, aside from the benefits that you just outlined regarding leadership and teamwork, it just feels so damn good. It's a wonderful experience. If we can get past the fear of doing it, I think it can add a lot. Do you use improv in any way in your one-on-one coaching sessions? And if so, how do you do that?
I have been doing so more and more. I'm actually building out a new program that's kind of more directly lining up coaching with it. But a lot of it is really around frameworks. What I tend to coach on a lot of is leaders who are looking to like level up their leadership presence, who are looking to get more like be authentic without getting overpowered by imposter syndrome, who are looking to just increase the engagement of their teams and create like a more collaborative environment. So there are a lot of ways like the concept I'm talking about in, say, a workshop also directly applies within a coaching engagement as well.
It sounds great. So Chris, this has really been great to talk to you. How can people, learn more about your company? If they wanted to engage with you, how would they do that?
Yeah. So my business website is Emboldify.com, and I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. It's Kristen Brun Sharkey if you search for me, or Kristen B. Sharkey if you just look for the URL. And I also just launched a new podcast about leadership with my husband, actually, who comes from a totally different perspective, but also loves nerding out on leadership as much as I do. And it's called Love and Leadership. We just dropped our trailer on the week that we're recording, but when this airs, we should have quite a few episodes out, and you'll be able to find more of me there too as well.
So it's called Love and Leadership?
Yes.
That's fantastic. And so it sounds like your husband is involved with the business with you as well?
He works in totally different, he's in like a senior living hospitality background executive.
Got it.
So that's part of the fun of it, is we come at it from different perspectives and experiences.
Well, I hope you keep up with your podcast. I think you got some really interesting stuff here, and definitely, run with that. It's a great platform. It's a unique kind of topic when it comes to leadership. Not everyone's talking about improvisation in leadership. It's at the sort of a new thing. So I think that's a fascinating angle and one that's definitely needed. And I wish you all the best. I think you're going to do quite well with this.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Leadervation with Dean Newlund. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadervation.